Serious, what is the most unexplainable or paranormal event you yourself have personally experienced? My baby brother was born deaf and blind. Verified by a few individual doctors. No medical treatments done of any kind. Only thing that happened was the church my family belongs to prayed a lot for him. All around the world. At about 6 months one day my mom dropped a pan in the kitchen and he was startled, for no explainable reason. His hearing and vision were, and 16 years later are, nearly 100 normal. I've had an experiences, but mine happened on 2 separate occasions, and within days of each other. The first time I was outside with a friend, after a really bad snowstorm on Easter Sunday. It was about 2 a.m. and we both witnessed an omnipresent blue light that had the same hue and intensity in all directions, without any discernible source. It turned on for a split second, enveloping everything, then stopped. My friend and I looked at each other, but it was so brief that it really didn't register. Then, it came on again. But for a few seconds, and one more time for a few seconds, then proceeded to pulsate on and off at 1-second intervals for a few more seconds. We were both scared shitless, but I never had another experience like that again, nor have I heard of anyone else having one. Looking back, I would assume that it was natural phenomena, perhaps far-off lightning reflecting off the snow, but it was extremely eerie at the time. The next experience that I had several days later was that I was walking near the back of my garage at around 10 o'clock at night, and suddenly I heard a very doorbell-like noise emanating from the rear corner of the garage, but it was really freaky in the way it held the last tone, almost like a ding-dong. The garage was a detached garage without electricity, my house didn't have a doorbell, and the nearest house was approximately a third of a mile away. Full disclosure, I was smoking pot both times. That's what bored teenagers growing up in rural upstate NY did in the mid-90s, so that could have easily been the cause of both situations, and I get that. However, I was a pretty experienced marijuana user by then, and you were expected to hold your own when using drugs in my circle of friends. In other words, I didn't hallucinate when smoking pot, nor did I try to. Also, the blue light experience with my friend, another experienced marijuana user, was a shared experience. If only he or I saw it, it could be written off as a silly stoner daydream. But the fact that we both saw it does confirm its validity. There's a small graveyard near my home in Michigan. About 2 years ago a group of my friends and I went ghost hunting there. It was a warm night, clear skies, and I was raring to catch a ghost on my friend's camera or tape recorder. Even a cell phone video would do. The cemetery is less than an acre, so it didn't take long to scope out. We broke into groups of 2 and 3 and traversed the grounds. I wandered with a few people, changing from group to group. I felt restless. Usually when we were ghost hunting, we cracked wise, but nobody was saying much. A group near a tall monument, at least 7 feet high and shrouded in vines, called us over. There seemed to be a cold spot about the size and shape of a very tall man. I waved my hands through the air. It did feel a bit cooler, but that could have been my imagination. Everyone began taking pictures, claiming they could see a figure in the digital photos. I hung near the back of the group, not seeing anything. I still felt disquieted. I didn't want to be here. That was when a cold shock squeezed my hand, right between the web of flesh between my right thumb and forefinger. I cried out, yanking my hand away. It hurt. The cold radiated slowly off my hand, and I retreated towards the gate. I'm out. Something grabbed me. I'm out. I was quickly followed by the rest of the party, not so much because of my encounter, but nobody wanted to be in there anymore. It wasn't until the morning the bruise showed up, deep in the meat of my hand. Not a bad bruise, not bad enough to turn black and blue, but definitely there. Yellow and painful, right in the spot where I'd been grabbed by the cold hand. I haven't been back. When I was young I remember looking up my stairs and seeing something anytime I focused hard enough. All you could see looking from the bottom of the stairs was the hallway leading from my room to my parents' room. If I just stood there and looked up without moving, a figure with very slender arms/legs, completely cloaked in shadow, and bright eyes would walk quickly with a hunched back from my room to my parents' room, stopping only to take a 2 seconds glance at me, then continue. I never saw it anywhere else and eventually I grew uninterested and stopped looking. After a while I tried to see it again but no amount of focus brought the figure back. There was a rumor that one of my grandparents' friends' houses were haunted and they would tell this ghost to do stuff. I think her name was Linda? And then it would happen. She was a friendly ghost from what they said. Anyways, visiting my grandma, she decides to take me over there after church one day to show me. I was like 10, but I still didn't really believe her. Sure enough, Linda, move the curtains, and the curtains moved. Open the cupboard, it cracked open. I was freaking out. They asked me to ask her to do something. Everything they asked was kinda subtle, so I wanted to do something bigger. I said turn off the TV, and boom, it turned off. I couldn't believe it. We ended up sleeping there because they all drank and got drunk. I had to sleep on the couch alone and wanted to experiment more. I asked a couple simple ones like move the pen and stuff, but nothing actually happened. I said, tickle my hand, and held my hand out because I really liked people tickling my hand as a kid. Haha, I don't know, it just felt good. Sadly, nothing happened. A couple months went by and I remember my grandmother telling me again about the ghost and how her friend will randomly feel a tickle on her palms when she goes to sleep or watch TV in her living room. I thought it was pretty interesting. After my grandmother died, she left me her rocking chair, in which she used to read to me as a little boy. I kept it near my bed, and would read in it, before going to sleep. She and I were very close, like best friends, as well as family. Soon after her funeral, I would awaken several times each night, for months on end, and see her sitting in that rocking chair, looking at me and gently smiling. I'd speak to her, and she'd just rock in the chair, staring. It felt just as real as when she had been alive, right down to the last detail, including the motion of the chair. This went on almost nightly, for the better part of a year. At which point, it suddenly stopped, never to recur. And now, when I touch her rocking chair with my hands, I feel an energy or something unexplainable, but it's there. Apparently I can sense, for lack of a better word, when bad things are going to happen to loved ones. My mom is the opposite. She can sense when good things are on the horizon for loved ones. Once my mother and I were walking along a beach in Mexico. I started to get nervous and told her we needed to turn around because she was going to step on a stingray and we would have more than a mile walk back to the hotel for help. She laughed it off and told me she was stingray shuffling and I worried too much. Not 5 minutes later she yelled at the top of her lungs and came flying out of the water. A stingray had sliced open her foot and she was bleeding badly. A few years later she was working in the yard. I started to get the same uneasy feeling and told her to come in before she hurts herself. She told me she only had a little more work to do and to chill out because she'd be fine. A few minutes later I heard her swear under her breath, and when I ran out to her she had broken off 90% of her toe with a motorcycle trailer tongue. I had to take her to the emergency room for that one. My brother told me he was going to cook some food. I got that same feeling as with my mom's injuries and I told him be careful. Yet again, a few minutes later he had opened the can of peaches, popped top, and sliced it right through his finger near to bone. Another emergency room visit. I got the same feeling again when my dad got in a bad car accident and nearly died, as well as before he smashed off the tip of his finger at work. My mom gets the same thing, except she can feel things like pregnancies, engagements, promotions, or money randomly seeming to drop from the sky into our pockets. I'm not sure how or why it works the way it does, but I know I've never had that horrible gut sensation and not had a loved one get seriously injured within minutes. Years back, before cell phones had cameras on them, I was at the bar with some friends. About an hour or so passes and in comes my brother. Now, I was living in Oklahoma at the time, and my brother was living in California. Ran up to him to give him a big hug and start to ask when he got into town. He pushes me back a little and says he doesn't know who I am. I take a second look at him. Yup, looks just like my brother. I say, come on Rich, haha, funny. He was adamant that he was not my brother. At this point I was getting a little pissed. I get my cell phone, going to cost a bit, but, out of area call be damned, I will get to the bottom of this. I call my brother's home phone in California. Sure enough he answers. I was really freaked out. I scoured the bar looking for that guy, but I never did find him. It was like my brother had a twin living in Oklahoma someplace. I never saw him again. Damn it, why couldn't I have my Note 3 back then? When I was 13, I took a ring that did not belong to me from my dead great-grandmother's house. My family was cleaning out her house after her passing, and so I thought the ring was up for grabs. Turns out, it was supposed to go to my mother's cousin. I was too embarrassed to fess up for taking it and I decided to keep it so I wouldn't get in trouble. I never told a soul that I had this ring in my possession and no one in my family could find it. Spare me the guilt trips, I know I messed up. This was roughly the year 2000, I believe. About 5 years ago, my aunt, who is out of her mind and no one takes her serious, kept telling my mother that she had a piece of jewelry that did not belong to her. My mom had no clue what my aunt was referring to and just wrote her off as crazy, which she is. However, my aunt was adamant my mother had a piece of jewelry that didn't belong to her and my mother must give it back. So my mom tells her that she did take a necklace from the house that day, but it was only costume jewelry. My aunt corrects her and says no, this is a ring. It's green. It's supposed to go to her cousin. My mom tells me this story to vent about my aunt's craziness. And my jaw just drops. I had to tell my mother right then that I had the ring, and had it all these years. I can't tell you how my aunt knew, or what possessed her to even bring the topic up 10 years later. But it was all too coincidental, as there is no way she could have known that ring was in that house. I never told one person about having taken that ring. And my aunt still doesn't know to this day that I was the one who had it. A few months after my dad's passing, my mom, my sisters and I really felt a strong vibe around the house, just as if my dad was still around us. Sounds pretty normal within people who have lost family members, especially one so close as a father. About a year later, I'm in my room just getting ready to sleep. I was just lying on the bed watching some TV when suddenly I felt someone sit on my bed. I felt it, and when I turned around to see if it might have been my dog, all I saw was the bed actually being pushed down with real weight and the shape resembling someone sitting down, but obviously, no one was there. I actually did not feel any fear as I immediately felt my dad was around. This happened again, about 6 months later. Only thing different is that it happened to my girlfriend while I was out of the room. She obviously freaked out. Another event which I associate with this is this one time not too far from these two events. Again, I was in my room, this time sleeping in the middle of the night, probably around 2 a.m., when I start feeling something very weird. It felt like a sort of breeze inside my room. I have AC, so the room was pretty cool, but this was different. It was like I was somewhere up in a mountain with a lot of breeze. I wake up and turn around to see the ceiling and just saw like a cloud of colors. It was literally a cloud full of colors, going from green to blue, to pink or magenta, orange, yellow and lots of white. Apart from the colors there was light and again this breeze. I panicked, covered myself for a few minutes and waited for the breeze to go away. Once it did, I pulled the sheet away from my head and just saw nothing but pure blackness. Definitely one of the craziest experiences I've witnessed. I got hit by a car, while I was on my bike, in 2003. I was a kid, only 8 years old. I only ended up at that intersection at that time coincidentally, but coincidences saved my life too. I had a person with me, which I almost never did, who called the ambulance. That kid had just met me that day. We were both looking for our friends, who were siblings. They weren't home. He lived in my dad's old home. That kid never was able to look me in the eye again, but left me a stuffed animal on my porch. A trauma nurse was next on the scene. An ambulance was called to a non-existent address for something far less serious, so they rerouted that ambulance to me. My grandmother showed up on the scene with my sister. She was bringing my sister home from camp. My parents were already there, having been called by a local business owner who knew me. The police officer on the scene had lost his brother to an accident just like this, so he returned my mangled bike. The guy who hit me showed up to the hospital in tears, didn't try to dodge any responsibility or anything. I ended up severely depressed in the following years, probably due to the TBI I'm suspecting I'll get diagnosed with when I see the neuropsychic I got referred to for lingering symptoms. Aphasia, organization problems, memory problems, and so on. Anytime I struggled with the idea of suicide, I remembered how hard the universe seemed to pull itself together to keep me alive. Now I also seem to be aware of how much it likes to toy with me, but I just laugh it off. So long as it keeps me alive, I'm comfortable with that. A UFO encounter. My mom picked me up from my Boy Scout meeting when I was 13. It was in the fall if I recall correctly, so it was already dark. As we were not 2 minutes from home, I look up at the stars and see an even darker triangle against the black sky. At each of the corners there were blinking lights. It was hanging relatively low in the sky like a helicopter and was also motionless. I told my mom to stop the car, and turn off the engine. The weird part is that though it wasn't moving, it wasn't making any noise either. After about 30 seconds it just flies off. The way it flew off was weird too. Extremely fast acceleration, way faster than any helicopter I have seen, and its flight speed was more like a jet than something solo flying. Even though it flew away so fast, the aircraft remained silent. Anyways, weird stuff. My mother, my friend, and I were going to Lewiston for a funeral. We took that Friday off school, and my mom went out to start the car. The Mercury Sable was leaking something on the ground, so she decided to take the Tahoe instead. About an hour later, we were near Rosalia. A college student in a black Ford Focus dropped her makeup, and bent under her seat to get it. Essentially, this happened: 1 fatally, Focus driver, 3 severely injured. Officers later contacted us, and said there would have been 4 fatalities if we'd taken the Mercury Sable. Also, it was just dripping from the AC unit, which it's supposed to do. Likely not paranormal, but still interesting to think how a pretty precise coincidence could have prevented my death. Although, if you take all the precise seconds into account, we may have left earlier, later, or stopped for the restroom at different intervals in the Mercury, so it's difficult to say really. My family was ready for school, already running late, and the tiny Volvo we drove everywhere wouldn't start. My mom was reasonably upset and we all piled into her backup vehicle, which was my grandmother's robust late 80s tank of a Chevrolet Caprice she gave my mom when she stopped driving. On the way to school we got into an accident. A truck driver who wasn't paying attention T-boned our car on the side where I was sitting. No one was hurt. The accident also pushed us into the oncoming traffic, but by some strange coincidence no cars were there at that instant even though it was a crowded road. The Volvo would have been a tangle of scrap metal. The Caprice saved our lives. I was visiting my grandparents in Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania. Over the weeks, people were reporting a large, black cat wandering around. Everyone surmised it was a black cougar and people were quick to arm themselves and their properties. It was a strange time. Cougars are an extreme rarity in those parts. As in, haven't been seen in 30+ years rarity. My parents, brother and I were visiting up there. One evening, I said goodnight to everyone and wandered through the dark hallways of my grandparents' enormous farmhouse to the stairway. They never used their front door, but I absently decided to look outside the aligning window and into their front yard. I saw the enormous night sky and then some sort of huge shape came running directly towards me. As my eyes adjusted, I realized to my abject horror that it was an enormous black wolf-like creature. It had 2 big pointed ears and what looked like a huge tongue sticking out of its mouth, but its eyes were what terrified me the most. 2 enormous yellow-green eyes trained on me with what I felt was the utmost evil intent. I'm telling you, this thing was gigantic. At least 5 foot at the shoulder. I screamed and jumped back and prepared myself for the loud thud of the creature's body contacting with the window pane. At the speed it was going, it would have hit that window easily, but I heard nothing. Timidly, I peeked outside under the curtain and there was nothing there. The yard looked as empty and dead as ever. I scanned my eyes all over the place, searching, but this thing was gone. I tried telling my parents and they went outside to look but found nothing. Not even footprints. I wonder to this day if that cougar people were seeing was really something else. My creature was definitely canine-like. Not feline in any way whatsoever. I saw a triangle UFO fly over my neighborhood when I was 7 or 8. Later that night, I had a dream that my sister and I were in the backyard playing with these weird kids during the night. Suddenly, they disappeared and there was a holographic eye looking down at us in the sky. Next morning, my mom told us that when she came home late that night, she heard the door open and one of us came through from outside. My room has stairs that connect to the attic. Late at night, I heard footsteps going up and down. So I yelled, "Be quiet. I'm trying to sleep." And they stopped. Another time I woke up and saw someone sitting at the foot of my bed watching me. I looked at the clock, looked back at him and watched him fade away. Yeah, I live in an old house. It was 3 a.m. I still remember the time because the alarm clock was the only thing to look at in my pitch-dark room. I was a kid whose family had just moved to a small town in the south. The house we lived in was pretty old. The original building was built sometime in the 1830s by a priest from the church across the street. Since that time other sections were added on, but the room in which I slept was all original. At one point my dad tore up some of the crinkled drywall to find huge oak logs behind it. But no buried treasure or dinosaur skeletons, haha. So anyway, it's raining in the dead of night as I'm holed up in this creaky rotten room. Part of the ceiling has deteriorated and is steadily leaking rainwater. Going to sleep is out of the question. I simply pull my covers over my head and lay on my side. I hear a scuff or a creak on the floorboards, and reflexively turn to the sound. I don't lift my head, as I'm already worried. I just rotate my head so I can see what's going on from the corner of my eye. I can tell there is a figure, wearing something blue and gray, a coat probably. He is walking sort of slowly towards my bed. I'm struggling to think of definite details, but what I saw was not worth analyzing. It was clearly some sort of ghost, so I buried my head in my pillow and hoped to be left alone. The figure continued to walk forward, next to my bed, and then next to me. I peeked ever so slightly and stared straight at his leg. I shut my eyes again and tried to ignore his presence. Then I awoke, and for years since made sure never to stay up till 3 a.m. I don't know what I really saw, and by now doubt if anything happened. Clearly it was someone old-timey, but there was not much else to it than that. Whether it was the ghost of a previous owner, or the priest, or some guy who just walked into my room, I'll never know. There were occasional occurrences that also couldn't be explained, but they don't tie in with the figure I saw. Earned a lot of sleep dead in that house. I was living in Kansas last summer and some weird shit went down in the house I was staying at. The first incident happened during the daytime. The layout of the house was that the washer machine and dryer were under the stairs to my room, the attic basically, so I could see the door to my room from the downstairs. I was doing laundry one day when all of a sudden my bedroom door slammed shut. This wasn't a wind-blown door closing. 1, it wasn't windy, and 2, the door opened towards the stairs, so if anything it would blow open. Not only did this freak me out, the bird that lived in the room with me freaked out. The second incident happened at night, on the stairs again. Not only did my roommate have a bird, but she had 3 cats, one of which is black. The black cat loved to sneak up the steps and try to spy on the birds, so she was always hanging out on the steps. I came home late after work when it was super dark out and saw what I thought was the black cat running down the steps to say hi. When I reached down to pet her, there was nothing there. Confused, I went to look for her, and found all 3 cats passed out on each other with my roommate. There is no way she could have gotten on the bed that fast without pissing off the other cats. This third thing just confused me a lot and may not have happened because I was tired and slightly buzzed. I came home after hanging out with some friends at like 2 a.m. I walked up the stairs, and when I opened the door I could have sworn that there was a man standing in front of me. All I could see was a black shadow in the shape of a man, darker than the rest of the room, in my doorway. I thought this was so real that I dropped everything and punched what became thin air. The last event is what makes me think that everything that happened before was real. I was doing dishes, completely awake and completely sober, and I looked away from the sink to talk to my roommate in the other room. My head was turned for less than 30 seconds, but I snapped it back when the tap turned on by itself. That was the freakiest shit that happened to me because I don't know how to rationalize that. I didn't tell my roommate any of the things that happened, but from just casually talking to her it was clear that something was going on. The bird was getting more and more anxious, freaking out over every little thing when he didn't used to. This is what really worried me, what the bird had to go through. He's probably seen some crazier shit than me. Last winter or so, I woke up to a loud metallic screeching sound, something between metal being crushed and something similar to fireworks going off. It was accompanied by flashing lights outside the window. I was groggy, and thought that it was some kids setting fireworks off outside my window for some reason. At 2, it sounds reasonable. I pulled on some longer pajama pants and went to my mother's room to tell her what was going on. There were loud noises and lights in the backyard. She didn't really care, and waved me away. I couldn't get a good view of what was going on from my bedroom window, so I went into the kitchen for a better look. That's when things got weirder. All I could see was a perfectly empty backyard, no sign of anything wrong. This is strange because I remember approaching the window that there were still lights and noises. I walked back to my mom's room to tell her what happened and looked at the clock. It was 4 a.m. It had been 2 a.m. when I'd talked to her, which was, for me, less than 5 minutes ago. I asked her, a little panicky, when I'd last been in there. She said 2 hours ago. I felt the blood drain from my face. I gave a nervous laugh and pretended nothing was wrong, then started to walk back to my room. I sat down on my bed and noticed a stinging on my left knee. I rolled up my pajama leg to take a look and turned on my bedroom light. There was a deep, fresh cut about 1.5 inches long on my knee. Despite being open, it wasn't bleeding. It was straight and neatly done, not puffy at all, and it hadn't yet started to scab or anything. I still have a very faint scar. For the next few days after this, my balance was very off, I had trouble walking, and lots of headaches. I have no idea what happened, me thinks aliens. My granddad, who lived in another country, was hospitalized for about a week, but the doctors said that he was getting better, so they released him from the hospital. A couple of days after he was released, he was rushed back to the hospital, and my family began to say our goodbyes to him and plan to visit him. That night, around 3 in the morning, my mom got a text message from my aunt that their dad, my granddad, passed away. We all gathered in my mom's bedroom in the upper floor of the house, and all of us started hearing a noise coming from our backyard downstairs. My brother and I went outside to check what could have made that noise, and it was one of those toy cars toddlers can sit on that make noise. The weirdest part though was that the toy car was upside down with the buttons facing the ground, so there was no way anything could have pushed the buttons down or anything. And there were no cats/dogs/other animals that might have pushed the buttons. The toy car kept making noises/playing music until the sun rose at 6 a.m., and it would only stop when one of us would come anywhere near it. It was the weirdest thing my family has ever encountered, but it was also very nice, I guess, since we thought it was just my granddad's way of saying goodbye to us. This past weekend I helped throw a bachelorette party for my friend at my family's lake house on a big lake in South Carolina. Our house juts out on a peninsula and most of the land around us is farmland and woods. The first night, 7 of us girls decided to take the golf cart to an abandoned house in the woods owned by a pretty prominent and old family in the county. We get to the house and park the cart in a little clearing in front of the shack, and using only one headlamp and the lights of our phones, we set out for the front porch. Lauren, the bachelorette, and I get to the porch and realize that Christine is missing from the group. We go back to the cart and halfway there realize that Christine is still sitting in the back of the cart by herself in complete darkness. We ask her what she's doing, and as she's staring into the woods, she asks us, "Don't you see him?" Lauren and I immediately hear the sound of footsteps running towards us, accompanied by a warm breeze that hits us right in the face. The running stopped at the edge of the woods. I quickly told them it was deer, and we went to the house not fully comprehending what had happened. When we get back to the lake house later, I realize that deer aren't known to rush upon people shining lights into the woods, and that if they were a deer, we would have seen them at the tree line and heard them retreating. The next morning, Christine tells us that she saw a man wearing tan pants and a loose-fitting blue button-up shirt. We can't explain that night, but I'm excited to go back in July. I spent the night at my cousin's house over spring break when I was 15. I had never spent the night there, so I didn't feel a reason to be afraid. The first night I heard crying, not just regular boo-hooing. This was utterly devastated, emotional crying. It started from the corner of the room and got progressively louder as it got closer to me. I could feel someone standing next to me, just sobbing. I have no idea how or when I fell asleep, but it continued throughout my stay there until I couldn't take it anymore and stayed with different family members. I was with my close friend sitting on a hilltop. I was at his house for the night, and we had decided to go on a walk as dusk settled in. The hill's got an awesome view overlooking our tiny, bright city, and we like to just sit on the curb and shoot the shit and listen to the leaves whisper. It was a really pleasant hill. One night we were doing the usual shit shooting and I look up, seeing a red light. It pulsed, red 1 second and dimming and reddening every few seconds. I mentioned it to my buddy and we both watched as it sailed about 15 feet overhead, gliding, bouncing through the air, almost, into a nearby tree. It rustled some leaves and exited the boughs and continued onwards, out towards the valley. We have no idea what it was. We were out at 10 at night in a sleepy neighborhood. It wasn't an RC plane, it wasn't an actual plane. It was just some red little light that floated above our heads, saying hello as it journeyed wherever. Didn't give me any weird or freaky vibes at all, but other occurrences on that hill were pretty creepy. Maybe a week after my boyfriend died I got a call. At the time he would usually be calling me, from an unknown number. In my sleepy state I freaked out and answered it, and it was him. We talked for around 3 minutes. I remember him telling me how sorry he was over and that he loved me. It's been 10 years, so that's the gist of what I remember. Then after the call I fell back asleep. When I woke up I assumed I dreamt it all. But on my old phone it showed up at the time I remember, and it was indeed a 3-minute long call. I knew it was really him. Over years I've asked for a sign and it's always revolved around the phone as the sign. 2 years ago I was working at a nursing home and was doing my rounds and looked towards the nurse's station. Everything was good. Or so I thought. No one was near it, and all of a sudden this sealed jug of water went flying from the desk. The closest nurse was 5 feet away from it. It just flew. The water exploded and went about 10 feet away. She assumed no one saw it and cleaned up the mess. While doing computer work she was saying about how it just flew. She was amazed when I backed up her story. She thought no one else saw it. Honestly, I was in a hurry and didn't want to pick up the water. It was crazy though. I've never physically seen something fly out of nowhere, and it was a good 5-pound jug. I was driving back home with a few friends after a show. Somehow we got on the topic of scary/supernatural stories, and I had had a few experiences by this time, so I was happy to indulge and tell a few of my own. Suddenly, after finishing up with one of my stories, I was hit with this incredibly eerie, inexplicable feeling that I was going to find a very specific picture of my late grandmother. It was a picture of us both at one of my soccer games, probably from when I was about 7 or 8, and was notable because I had piss yellow hair from a shoddy bleach job, as it was all the rage then. I remember it feeling so weird that I had such a specific intuition about such a specific object. I got dropped off, unluckily, to an empty house because my mom was staying at her boyfriend's house that night, and spent the whole night pretty spooked that my intuition would involve some supernatural event that night. The night passed, and when I woke up my mom was downstairs. Being a teenager at the time, naturally I had some plans for the day, but my mom instructed me that I was to clean my room before I was allowed out of the house for the day. I'm cramming miscellaneous things in the closet, under the bed, and in my dresser when I notice a red paper folder pressed up against the back of this compartment in my dresser, behind a piece of wood that divided the compartment in two. I pull it out, and before I even know it I have the strangest feeling wash over me, and I already know what is inside the folder before I even open it. There was nothing in the folder besides an 8x11 glossy printout of the exact picture of me and my grandma from my soccer game with the piss yellow bleached blonde haircut that I knew was going to find the night before. I know it's not exactly spooky, but I can assure you that it is 100% true, and I still can't really explain how I knew I was going to find that particular picture after not even realizing I had it in my possession, and in such a hidden spot of all places, and I feel that's pretty strange as is. Long story short, I lived in a crazy haunted house from when I was about 10 to when I was about 19. It didn't look like a typical haunted house. It was a one-story, 70s-era construction without a basement. The only weird feature it had was a sunken-in fireplace room or den, which was paved with bricks instead of carpeted. A short set of stairs led down into it, and 2 sides were open, with railings instead of walls, so that you could look up into the kitchen and the front hall. One night I'm sitting down in the sunken room, on a couch which faces the front hall. It's really late at night and I'm talking on the phone with a friend. We're joking and laughing about stuff, the usual. All of a sudden, I catch movement out of the corner of my eyes. I look up, and there's a girl walking in from the front door. She's probably in her mid/late teens, long dark hair, and she's wearing what I can only describe as a Catholic school uniform. Plaid, blue, skirt, tall socks, and a dark sweater vest. For a second, I think someone has broken silently into our house in the middle of the night. I'm so startled I literally dropped the phone. I watch this girl, solid as a real, living person, walk slowly down the hall, and then through the laundry room door at the other end. After another second, I pick up the phone, say hasty goodnights, and run off to bed. I have a sister, but this girl looked nothing like her, and my sister also can't go through doors. Sometime later, maybe a year, half a year, I'm up early getting ready for school, eating breakfast at the kitchen table. My head's down over the bowl because I'm wolfing it down trying to be on time. Again, out of the corner of my eyes, I see something. This time it's the bottom half of a boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, and he's wearing blue shorts with a yellow t-shirt. I freak out, naturally, because I don't have any little brothers living with me at the time. I jerk my head up and look around, but he vanished. Now this next part is only partly my own story, but it's definitely connected to the one I just shared, so it's important. Over the years of living in this place, the haunting sort of began to escalate. A lot of people saw stuff. Things got moved, someone even got hurt. My older sister wasn't there for most of it, and because she had a lot of things going on in her life, we didn't tell her because we didn't want to upset her. She moved out about 2 years before we did, but one night she came back for a visit. When she gets there, she's obviously in some distress. She doesn't say anything to my mom about it, so after my mom leaves the room, I ask her what's up. She tells me that about halfway home, she could have sworn she hit a kid in the road, except there was no kid when she got out to check, and no bumps/blood/anything on her car. I asked her to describe the kid. You guessed it, blue shorts, yellow t-shirt. I had never told her about the boy. This cross-area haunting is probably the weirdest thing I've ever been a part of, but I've had paranormal experiences at pretty much every house I've ever lived in, one exception. More crazy stuff happened in this house, like I said, but not directly to me other than little things, shadows, lights flickering, little items moving, the usual. I've also got plenty more stories where that came from, but I think the house we lived in was probably the most unexplainable, since I can't find any logical reason for it whatsoever. Was doing Ouija board shit with my cousin and some people we met at a supposedly haunted hotel in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. We were outside on the balcony, talking to some ghost through the board and kept telling it to do something to show us that it was actually a ghost. Now, the board was on a circular, wrought iron table, and eventually, after asking for the ghost to do something, the table rotated, with a harsh, grinding sound, maybe 15 to 20 degrees before stopping. We were perplexed. Took the top off of the table to look at it. Basically, the top portion slid into a circular hole in the bottom that held the legs. So, it was only the top portion that rotated, not the whole table. It never happened again and we could never figure that one out. I didn't believe in ghosts and I still don't believe in ghosts. There has to be some rational explanation, I just don't know what it is. This is going to be buried, but hopefully somebody will see this. I grew up in a very rural area, and when I was 6 to 7 years old I was sitting at the kitchen table with my uncle. I noticed our dogs wouldn't stop barking, so I just looked out the door. The table was right next to the patio doors. I seen this thing staring directly at me about 50 to 60 feet away from the house. Behind our house was the deep forest, but there was a random clearing. It stood at about 6 feet tall. It was greenish brown and covered in hair, and it bore a striking resemblance to the Grinch because that's what I thought it was. I turned my head to look at my uncle to see if he noticed, but he was still preoccupied with a newspaper. I told him to look, but he only seen the thing walking away. We never told anybody about it. And I never forgot its size. My BF and I were cuddling on the couch when I touched something wet in the corner of the couch. I was confused since we just got on the couch and didn't bring any drinks. It was the same place where his cat had once pissed, but the cat was given away weeks ago. So I decided to ignore. But then my BF also realized the stain and it smells like cat piss. We still have no explanation for the wet stain and since then doesn't use the corner of the couch. When I was 8, I saw me wearing different clothes and solid black eyes slam against a window of a room I was in alone at a funeral home. My great-granddad had died. I immediately ran out and blamed my brother. I was yelling and beating the shit out of him, as much as I could. He is an older brother, and he started giggling at the situation and yelling he didn't do it. After we both calmed down, he explained that he really didn't do it, and didn't even go outside. I usually wouldn't have believed him, but everyone vouched for him that he was in the kitchen. Weird shit, man. I was free climbing a 30-foot cliff face once. The face was mostly shale rock with plenty of handholds, and I was young and dumb. 2/3 of the way up, my left handhold broke free as I was reaching with my right and I started to fall. You know that feeling when you're tilting back in a chair and you tilt just a little too far? That's exactly what I felt. I started to fall backwards and everything got real slow. I knew I was going to die or at best be crippled. I felt a hand gently press against my back, right between my shoulder blades. It felt like a perfectly normal right hand and it pushed me back against the rock face. I took a moment to steady myself. I was pretty shaken up, and then I climbed down to safety. I am inclined to believe that it was a guardian angel, but that is solely based on my religious background and I don't know where said guardian angel was when I got hit by a car. I suppose it could have been a hallucination, but I don't use drugs and I wasn't on any medications. I'll probably never know what happened, but I am very thankful that I didn't fall. So, my family and I moved into our new house about a year ago, and there has been multiple strange things that have happened. Here's the most recent one, and the one that scared me the most. So we were having some trouble with our plumbing, and the only working shower was downstairs in the basement. I hate that bathroom. The shower is a puke green and looks like a cell of some kind, and there's very little light in there. Anyway, The way our basement is set up, the bathroom opens up into this storage hallway. There have been other weird experiences with the hallway before, so I was already a little apprehensive about it. I was down there taking my shower, and I heard a faint music. I assumed that it was my little brother playing guitar. His room is down there and he's really into that now. Plus the sound was kind of muffled from the water, so I just ignored it. I got out of the shower and got in my towel and such. Then I heard it again. It was still very faint, and definitely wasn't guitar music. It sounded like an old music box or something like that. I wasn't about to run upstairs without getting dressed, so I just kind of forced myself not to think about it while getting dressed as quickly as I could. I got my stuff together and opened the door to go upstairs. I was very pointedly not looking at the hallway. The music had stopped when I opened the door. I walk really quickly into my brother's room, which is also connected to the hallway. The lights in the hallway were off. I swear, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye, a shadow of some sort, just standing near the back of the hallway. I booked it out of there and sprinted up the stairs and haven't used that bathroom since. I wouldn't put so much relevance on the weird things that happen in my house, if it weren't for one thing: the man who lived in the house before we got it, died while he was living here. I've never commented on a thread asking about these things because I always show up too late. But I do have a genuine experience that shook me as a skeptic. I live in PHX. In my sophomore year of high school, some friends and I took a weekend camping trip to the desert south of Anthem. Typical high school stuff: beer, bud, bonfire. However, the weekend we did it was unexpectedly cold. Oz winter typically means we need a light jacket. That weekend it was near freezing and soaked from the previous week's rain. After about 30 minutes of driving, we reached the off-road route we had to take to reach our destination. I was in the passenger seat of the lead car heading out into the desert. I was texting people in the cars behind me, looking up between these messages at the desert brush in front of me. My friend was driving slow, head out the window looking to miss any major potholes. A third person sat in the middle back seat, yet so far hunched over in the small car he was practically in the front with us. That picture I included is what this narrow path was surrounded by, and the biggest shrubs reached approx 8 feet in height. So picture this, out in the middle of nowhere, driving slow, the weather is bad, and I happen to glance up from my phone for a very memorable split second. After a cursory glance up and then back down again at my phone, I immediately froze. It took that extra split second of looking away to process what it was I thought I saw. Right at the edge of the shrubs, just at the end of the headlight distance, I saw for a split second that which appeared to resemble a tall thin man in a gray morph suit. I assumed that the gray was just shadow, but in that light it passed to skin in the back of my mind. Maybe 6+ in height, right at the edge of the shrubs, only visible momentarily before vanishing further into the brush. I assumed it was because of the environment, visually distracting and keeping me a bit on edge, causing my mind to trick itself. I inhaled slowly so I would sound as calm as possible when I told my friends what I just saw. Immediately upon hearing my description, Alec, the guy in the back seat, shouted out with agreement, saying he thought he saw the exact same thing. Cody, the driver, assuming we were messing with him, took convincing that neither of us were lying. After we set up shop we told the others what happened. The rest of the night we were on edge, but nothing new happened to scare us. Fast forward to this last fall. I'm talking with a friend, calling me to talk about a paranormal talk he recently had. Jacob was out there with us that night, and believed what we said. After HS he enlisted in the Navy, and while eating lunch one day, found out that a fellow crewmate was an American Indian from Oz. He found this out when a group of them had a conversation about Bigfoot and the like, and the guy mentioned his upbringing and some Native American legends. The description he gave was very similar to the thing that I witnessed, and had been talked about in native circles for years as a sheep, and occasionally child thief. Upon hearing this he called to inform me about it. Does anyone know anything else about stories like this? Oz is strange. My uncle was never the type of person who believed in ghosts or other such stuff. After he moved into his new house about 6 years ago he started to experience different strange events in his house. At first it was just the typical poltergeist stuff, objects being moved, cupboards opening and TV and radios being turned off and on. Eventually worse things started happening to him. He and my auntie would be pushed out of bed and off of the sofa, and sometimes his car would start itself. One time, me and my brother and our grandmother stayed over at his place, and during the day none of the stuff he claimed happened occurred. During the night, however, everyone was woken up by a loud crash in the kitchen and everyone had left their rooms to go look. The five of us found the kitchen in a horrible state with pots and pans everywhere with a bit of food from the fridge scattered around as well. After we returned to our rooms, everyone's windows had been opened to their widest. Me at the age of 10 and my 12-year-old brother promptly noped out and slept in my grand's car. My uncle and auntie still live in the house even now and this shit still happens, but the house is so nice and exactly how they want it, so they refuse to move. For a number of years, I have replaced the knob on my bedroom door with a deadbolt. I have 3 younger brothers, an older brother, and older sister. I prefer my privacy and don't like my room being ransacked when I'm not there. So, keep this in mind. One day, I was dozing off, and I was about that stage of sleep when you aren't quite asleep, but not quite awake either. I heard someone walking across my room, like the sound of feet stepping on carpet slowly. I just figured it was one of my brothers. Then, I felt someone lift my blanket, but not pull it off of me, or really move them. They just kind of lifted it, then dropped it. I feel like something is weird, but as I'm so close to falling asleep, I don't react. Then I feel someone climb on top of me, one leg over me, sitting on my belly. I feel the mattress compress, I feel the weight of the person, the whole ordeal. At this time, I start to think that someone is trying to pull some kind of prank. A running joke is that my friends have hugged me in my sleep, as I don't like hugs. Within that second to complete that thought, I feel a hand grab my face with great force and shove my head into my pillow and hold it for a split second. I jump up, look around my dark room, and there is nobody there. Door is locked, keys on the floor next to me. I throw on my pants and walk into the hallway. My room was upstairs, as was a den, another bedroom, the master bedroom, and a bathroom, and all the doors were open, but nobody was upstairs. I went downstairs and only my brother and 2 friends were even home at the time, and they were in one of the bedrooms downstairs. They thought I was playing around when I told them what happened. It took a little while, but I ended up going to sleep just fine. Mine is pretty boring, but it's the biggest thing that stands out when I try to remember events I have no explanation for in my life. When I was about 12, me and my family went on holiday to a really old cottage in Yorkshire. One morning my family called me downstairs to eat breakfast, with the stairs being next to a bedroom. I remember looking into the corner of their room on my way down and seeing something that scared me so much I couldn't move, but I've completely blocked it out of my mind, so I can't picture what it was at all. I remember seeing a bed and the chest of drawers behind it, but really can't remember what I saw that made me feel that way. I ended up running downstairs and everyone asking me what's wrong, and I said nothing. But I remember sweating and feeling nauseous and creeped out for the rest of our time there. It was honestly probably some sort of panic attack that came out of nowhere, but I haven't had that feeling before or since. Years ago, while I was working the customer service desk at a sporting goods store, I suddenly realized I had lost one of my earrings, a little silver ball. I searched all over the service desk enclosure, shook out my clothes and hair, nothing, couldn't find it. About a week later, I was sitting at my table at home, putting on makeup. The lone leftover silver earring was laying on the table beside my makeup mirror. As I was leaned toward the mirror, I heard a tiny little dink on the wood of the table beside me. I looked down to the floor and saw what I assumed was the leftover earring, until I went to put it on the table. There, where it had been since the day I lost the one, was the leftover earring. Since I had showered, washed my hair and changed clothes multiple times since that day, and was not wearing any of the clothing I had on that day, I have no idea where on earth that second, previously lost earring came from. It was like it just dropped out of the sky. A few months ago I was walking in my room on the first floor and saw a cat. We don't own a cat. I ran out the room because the cat shocked me and I waited outside the door. When I walked back and it was gone, I was kinda sad since I really want a cat. When I was 15 I lived in this 200-year-old house in Virginia with my parents and sister. I knew there was something in my room from the first week. There was a strong presence in the room almost all the time, and it would be very intense at night. I was always terrified while trying to go to sleep, because that invisible force was just so strong. I felt like I was chalking in it. I had a very hard time sleeping in that house, and was very sleep deprived while living there. The only way I could sleep was if I turned and faced the wall my bed was against, wrapped myself in my blanket, and curl up in a small ball. I would stay like that until I was able to fall asleep at 3 a.m. Every night for 10 months, one night I was facing out into the room, and I felt that same intense presence right next to me. Please note, I was fully awake at this point, this was no dream. I heard a voice in my head say, if you open your eyes, you are going to see something. Well, I did just that. And sitting on my bed, in the space between my bent legs and chest was a man. This man was probably 27-ish, with short brown hair that looked like it needed to be cut, long eyelashes, brown eyes and 5 o'clock shadow. I can still see his profile in my mind. He was transparent, and was wearing a white dress shirt, and I think a gray unbuttoned vest. My first thought was wow. He's really attractive. I stared at him for a few seconds, blinked, and he was still there. He wasn't looking at me, but was facing away slightly, looking down with a melancholy expression. Panicked, I closed my eyes and prayed to God he would go away, and if he couldn't send him away, to just let me fall asleep quickly. After I said that prayer, I felt the presence move away from me, and it was replaced with an amazing feeling of peace and love. I fell asleep seconds later. I have so many crazy stories from that house I could write a book, but this was the only time I saw a full person. I've had a few, though I usually attribute them to hallucinations. I was probably 14, maybe 15. I had just gotten home from school and was laying on my bed relaxing. I was a born-again Christian at the time and sometimes felt guilty about relaxing. This particular day I heard what sounded like a dog growl. I then felt this weight on my chest. I swear that I felt this weight slowly increase and could hear the springs on the mattress squeal as they were pushed down. Then for maybe 30 seconds I felt this very hot breath on my face. After that, nothing. Everything went back to normal, and after a few seconds I went back to business. My rational explanation is that I was close to sleep and feeling guilty, so my mind played a trick on me. But that explanation really doesn't satisfy me much. My family and I were planning on visiting my grandfather's grave. The night before, I received a phone call from an unknown number. The person on the other end was a very old man who said my name and that he wanted to come with us tomorrow. A woman then took the phone from him and explained he dialed me by accident and that she was his caretaker. Apparently this guy was senile and dialed me randomly. The fact that he knew my name was really weird. When I was in high school, my house had some weird things happen. I've suspected it was my stupid attempt at spell work without knowing WTF I was doing. In later visits I realized the house felt dark and like there was something in it that hated me. Anyway, it was an older, not well cared for, little house. The carpet in the hallway was so old it made a slight crunching sound when you walked on it. The pad was damaged? I dunno. My brother's room was down the hall from mine and our bathroom was directly across from my room. It was a house rule that we slept with the doors open, something about airflow in the AC unit. I used to hear someone walking in the hall in the middle of the night. Just up and then down and back a few hours later. One morning my brother asked me what the hell I was doing in the hall late at night. I told him I thought it was him. Nope. We could hear both our parents snoring away, so it wasn't them, and we didn't have pets. One night I was falling asleep and heard clothing rustle in my room. My mom kept a few dresses that didn't fit in her closet in my closet, so I opened my eyes to ask if I could help her find something. Only to see a little girl standing a few feet from my bed. She had wavy brown hair, a wide-brimmed hat, and wore a fluffy dress. I did the obvious thing and slammed my eyes shut as adrenaline pulsed through my body. When I opened, she was fading, and she faded with each blink. I never saw her again. More than once I felt someone get into bed with me. Like, I would feel the mattress depressed behind me and the covers pull slightly. I looked a couple of times or would shift an elbow or foot back to find nothing there. I had a weird experience in a different house involving lights outside if you want to hear that short story. Attention! Please keep in mind that the op of this thread has chosen to mark this post with the serious replies only tag. Therefore any replies that are jokes, puns, off topic, or are otherwise non-contributory will be removed. If you don't fall within the scope the question is directed to, please do not reply to the question, as your comment will be removed. If the question is bakers of Reddit, and you're not a baker, your comment will be removed. All top-level replies need to be from someone who is in the group the question was asked to. If you see others posting comments that violate this tag, please report them to the mods. Thanks for your cooperation and enjoy the discussion. I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit if you have any questions or concerns. I've seen shadow people. I know most people write it off as just seeing things that aren't there or maybe an overactive imagination as a child, but my experiences with them are some of my most vivid memories to this day. My dad wouldn't let me play video games in the living room, so I kept my games in the room I shared with my sister. I stayed home from school one day and decided to go in there to play some games after my sister had left. Directly opposite of the bedroom door were blinds in my sister's bed. I hardly put any force into opening the door, but the blind slammed against the window, which immediately caught my attention. What seemed like a 3D silhouette crawled out from under her bed and scampered across the floor and into the closet. The way it moved was almost spider-like, quick but with only 4 legs. I had no idea how to react to what I just saw, so I ran to the closet, slammed the door closed, and spent the rest of the day at the pool until my dad came home. When I was 10 to 12 years old, I can't remember my exact age. My mother worked weekends at a foundation whose job it was to take care of an estate, some grounds, an ironworks, and a large house. When you walked in the front door of the house, there was a foyer, with stairs on the right going up to the second floor, and to the right and left were French doors going into parlors or sitting rooms. The left was where my mother's desk was and the right was still a sitting room with chairs and a couch. I was in the right reading a book on the couch when Mom said she was going to get lunch and wanted to know if I wanted to go with. I declined and went back to reading. Some time passed but not long when I heard a noise. I was engrossed in the book so I didn't hear it clearly. I grew up in an older home so they make noise, so I didn't think much of it. A few minutes pass and I hear what sounds like younger kids giggling. So I stop reading and am listening. I don't hear it again, so I go back to reading. Few more minutes pass and I hear them again. Clearly this time. So I get up, walk into the foyer, and look around. I don't see anything. So I turn and take a step into the room and I hear very clearly 2 kids giggling just to left, on the stairs. I turn to the right, take a step or 2, open the door, and go out on the porch. That is where my mother found me. She asked me why I was out there. I related the story and she laughed, saying, "Oh, you heard the kids?" I'm fairly sure she explained who they were, but I cannot remember. 2 things happened that day. 1, from that day until the day I leave this world, I believe in ghosts, spirits, or whatever you want to call them. 2, I never stepped foot in that house again. One summer night in 2011, me and 4 friends were walking home from McDonald's long after a night of partying. Most of us were sober by that time. Right when we were about to get to the house, we were stargazing up at the moon and I pointed out what seemed to be a satellite passing through the sky when it suddenly turned and went around the moon, going straight, disappearing into the sky. 3 of the 4 friends confirmed they saw this, and to this day we talk about it and can't explain it. I'm sure this could very easily be explained or could just be my head messing with me, but anyway. My friends and I once got drunk and decided to go on an adventure to this place that we all consider the most haunted place from our childhoods. It's basically just this spot under a building that you can get into because there's a gap in the foundations. We had a few drinks and decided to go fight the ghosts that none of us or anyone had ever seen, because it's essentially not a haunted place, just a scary place. Got there not scary. Stole some funny things we found under there, which is a story for another time, and all was well. A couple days later I was left home alone and I could smell a burning smell. I looked everywhere in the house and couldn't find anything burning, and couldn't find anywhere that the burning smell got stronger. When my parents came home, the smell went away. The next day they left for work and the smell came back again. I found that whenever I was alone I was being followed by this burning smell. I got a bit freaked out and thought maybe I was being followed by a ghost from the spooky place, so I kindly asked it to go away. I have not smelt the burning smell since then. When I was younger I lived in a house which really gave off a strange vibe. Everybody always felt something there and my entire family was just uncomfortable. This house had an unusual set of stairs. They began heading in one direction, had a small landing in the middle, then turned and continued ascending in the opposite direction. One day I was walking down the stairs and I felt a strange sensation from around me, like something was watching me. As I hit the landing I looked up to view the top floor. Leaning over the railing of the upper staircase was a figure totally surrounded by black. I'm not sure if it was a cloak or shadow. I closed my eyes and let out a yell and reopened them, expecting the figure to be gone. But it was still there. I watched me for a few good seconds, then promptly turned and disappeared. There was no face, but the extremities resembled bone. It was similar to a Grim Reaper. I continued running down the stairs screaming to my parents and have since convinced myself it is a hallucination in hopes that whatever that thing was not real. This is one of many strange things I've seen, and definitely the scariest. Okay, so here's my experience. I live in Arkansas. In a town called Dover there is a phenomenon that has been occurring for 50+ years called the Dover Lights. To give you an idea of what happens, I'll explain the area. You're at an overlook on a rural back road. The overlook is situated on one side of the valley that it observes. The overlook is well over 300 feet from the valley floor. Below, a river runs from right to left. There are no houses, no power lines, no roads, or anything of the sort on the other side of the valley. Just a wooded hillside. Lots of people have been to Dover Lights tons of times and have never actually seen the lights. But I did, the first time I ever went. We got there as the sun was going down and nothing was going on. Someone told me that the lights were supposedly the ghosts of Spanish conquistadors that had been searching for gold, and that if you yelled "I've got your gold," the lights will show themselves. After several minutes of yelling, we got annoyed and just started smoking a joint. About an hour into it, I saw something. There was a faint light, spherical, floating about, I'm guessing, 100 yards out, directly in front of us and over the top of the opposite hillside, so the sky was all that was behind it. It was roughly the size of an orange and was glowing a greenish color. I yelled something stupid at it, and it got much brighter. Suddenly, they were everywhere. And much closer. There was a larger one about 100 to 150 feet in front of us. This one was bluish, and was shooting all over the place. At this point there were 5 or 6 of them in varying sizes and shapes just floating about. They would get brighter and dim, almost disappearing only to manifest themselves in a different position. Some of them would move up and down, and some of them in circles. It was amazing. I looked to my right, where the hillside juts out a bit, and from behind this point came another one. This one was orangey red and was traveling toward the larger blue one. It stopped a few feet shy of the blue one and just floated there. We sat there watching/yelling at them for a few hours and eventually they all slowly vanished. But not after lots of movement/dimming/brightening/ and even color transitions. It was nutty. I went up there thinking the whole thing was bullshit, but left a believer. I'm a scientific mind, and even I couldn't, still can't, come up with a logical explanation for this occurrence. When I was about 5 weeks old, I have a brain hemorrhage. None of the doctors expected me to survive. But I made a full recovery. And to this day, the cause of it remains unknown. I nearly died, and nobody has any idea why. Not a very creepy event, but still unexplainable. This happened when I was in my late teens. I was home with my family when a horrible storm came through one night and knocked out the power. I had some candles in my room and decided to shuffle and feel my way there. In my house, there is a long hallway that doesn't get lined from the outside. I have to go down this hallway to get to my room. I was feeling my way down the hallway in complete darkness when I noticed something about 2 feet off the ground. I look and see 2 dark red floating orbs. They floated slowly down the hallway, like dandelion seeds in a gentle wind, and slowly disappeared. I was at my cousin's house staying the night a few years ago and I slept in his room on the floor next to his bed. After a few minutes he says, "Hey, look up at the wall," and there was this orb thing. It was a glowing ball of light that hovered on the wall. There was no way he could have faked it, either. He talks about that apartment being haunted all the time, but that's the only time I've seen it firsthand. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.